This is the story of Elias van, the traveler who walked out of a feast that had lasted 300 years, or so he believed. Crescent moon, close your eyes. Let the silence speak. Let the past settle in. If this is your first time here, welcome. And don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss the next strange and sleepy tale from the forgotten corners of medieval Europe. There's a new story every night, waiting for you in the dark. Now breathe deep. And let the dream begin. Part 1: The Wedding Feast That Never Ended. In the year 1207, Duke Reginald of Valtoria threw what was meant to be the grandest celebration in the kingdom's history, a wedding feast to mark his union with Lady Isolde of Eldermere. The banquet hall was a masterpiece of medieval opulence. Its vaulted ceiling shimmered with golden carvings of vines and stars, while chandeliers of wrought iron held hundreds of candles that bathed everything in warm, flickering light. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and lost kingdoms lined the stone walls, their embroidered eyes seeming almost to follow the guests. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, honeyed pastries, and goblets overflowing with spiced wine. Musicians played lively tunes beneath painted arches, and nobles laughed, toasted, and danced as if they had been granted a piece of eternity. But then, as the third course was served, venison with figs, glazed in dark wine sauce, a figure entered the hall uninvited. No one saw where he came from. One moment, the great doors were closed. The next, he stood among them, unnoticed at first. He wore no crest or colors, only a long cloak of midnight blue and a lute strung with threads that shimmered like moonlight. He moved silently to the hearth and sat down. Then he began to play. At first, the melody was soft, haunting yet beautiful, like wind through autumn leaves. But as it spread through the hall, something changed. The laughter stretched unnaturally. A goblet tilted mid-pour and never spilled. A dancer lifted her foot and never brought it down. And then, the doors sealed shut. None could leave. None could die. And so began the legend of the feast that never ended. Part 2: Trapped in Celebration. Time did not stop all at once, it slowed, like a river thick with ice. At first, the guests thought it a trick of candlelight or wine too strong. But soon, they realized, nothing aged, nothing rotted, and nothing truly ended. Servants who should have collapsed from exhaustion simply kept pouring drinks, their faces growing paler with each passing hour. Musicians played until their fingers bled, then continued without pain. Dancers twirled endlessly, their silken shoes worn thin but still intact. The laughter never stopped. It echoed against the stone walls, louder than before, layered upon itself like voices speaking over one another. Some tried to scream, but even their cries became part of the song. Duke Reginald remained seated at the head of the table, his face frozen in a smile he had not chosen. Lady Isolde stared into her untouched wine, lips parted slightly, caught between words she would never speak. Outside the castle, centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Children were born, lived, and died, all while the feast continued behind locked doors. Some within remembered what had happened. Others forgot entirely, believing themselves trapped in an endless dream. Only one guest seemed untouched by time, the wandering bard who had played the cursed tune. He sat at the far end of the table, sipping wine that never warmed nor cooled, watching with sad amusement. "You asked for more time," he whispered once, though no one heard him clearly. "You just didn't ask what it would cost." And so the feast went on, undisturbed by seasons or stars, waiting for someone to remember its name. Part 3: The First Stranger. Generations passed outside the castle walls, and the tale of the eternal feast became legend. Some called it a curse. Others, a warning. A few believed it was nothing more than a bedtime story told to keep children from begging for sweets after dark. But in the year 1512, a monk named Thomas stumbled upon something strange, a stone archway hidden deep in the forest, overgrown with ivy and marked with symbols too old to read. Drawn by curiosity, he stepped through. At once, the air changed. Birds fell silent. The sky turned grey. And ahead, through the trees, he saw lights flickering behind stained glass. A castle stood where none should be. Thomas approached the great oak doors, heart pounding. He pressed his ear against the wood, and heard laughter. Endless, echoing laughter. Summoning his courage, he knocked. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the feast continued. Goblets hovered mid-air. Musicians played without blinking. Nobles smiled with frozen delight. And there, at the far end of the hall, sat the bard. He looked up, met Thomas's gaze, and smiled. "Welcome," he said softly. "Come back when you are hungry." Thomas backed away. He returned home and never ate again. On his deathbed, he whispered of the feast that never ends, and begged to be buried facing east. Part 4: Echoes of the Banquet. After Thomas vanished into silence, others followed. Over the centuries, many searched for the lost castle, some out of greed, hoping to claim treasures left untouched, others driven by sorrow, seeking lost ancestors still trapped inside. Most found nothing. The forest swallowed them whole, or they returned mad, speaking in tongues and staring at mirrors as if expecting someone to stare back. But a few made it inside. They described the same scene: endless laughter, frozen faces, music that never paused. Some claimed they saw people they recognized, great-grandparents, ancient kings, even figures from myth. One traveler swore he saw his own reflection seated at the table, smiling as if it had always been there. Another wept when she spotted her mother, unchanged since the day she disappeared decades before. They tried to speak. They reached out. But the moment they touched anything, glass, fabric, flesh, the spell pulled them in. Their bodies remained where they stood. Their minds became part of the feast. And so the hall grew fuller with each passing century. More chairs appeared. More plates were set. More laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. It was not a prison. It was a banquet. An invitation. And it was still waiting. Part 5. The Bard's Secret. Few who entered ever left. But those who lingered near the edge of the hall, close enough to listen, far enough to remain untouched, sometimes heard the bard whisper. He spoke to himself, or to the walls, or perhaps to something unseen. I gave them what they wanted, he murmured once, swirling his wine. They just forgot to say thank you. Another time, he was seen tracing symbols in spilled wine, muttering names no one recognized. Once, a woman who had slipped inside unnoticed caught him humming a tune different from the one that held the feast in place. It was softer, sadder. When she asked what it was, he simply replied, "A lullaby, for those who never learned how to sleep." She never got another word from him. But she stayed. Not because she couldn't leave. Because she didn't want to. For in the feast, time had no power. Sorrow had no grip. Death had no reach. It was not a curse. It was a dream. And dreams, once entered, are hard to wake from. Part 6. The Clock That Stood Still. Deep in the castle's tower, past winding staircases and corridors cloaked in shadow, there stood a clock unlike any other. It was not made by human hands, nor marked with ordinary numbers. Its face was carved from obsidian so dark it seemed to drink the light, and its hands were forged from silver that shimmered even when no flame burned near. Before the feast began, the clock had ticked steadily, marking every heartbeat within the castle walls. But the moment the bard's music filled the banquet hall, it stopped. Not broken. Not silent. Pause. Those who dared climb the spiral staircase described the same thing, a silence so complete it felt like standing inside a held breath. Dust hung in the air like frozen snow. Cobwebs stretched across corners untouched by time. And yet, if you press your ear to the cold metal, you could hear something. Whispers. Names. Hundreds of them. Each one spoken just before they entered the feast. Some said the clock did not measure hours, but souls. Each tick counted another life drawn into the endless banquet. And now, after centuries, it remained frozen, waiting for someone to remember how to live. But time, like memory, is fragile. And in Valtoria Castle, neither had moved in 300 years. Part 7. The Mirror That Did Not Reflect. There was a mirror in the great hall, tall as a man and framed in gilded vines that curled like living things. It had once been a gift from a forgotten queen, placed at the far end of the banquet table so nobles could admire themselves between courses. But after the feast was trapped in time, the mirror changed. It no longer reflected those who stood before it. Instead, it showed something else. Visitors who wandered too close claimed it revealed memories they had never lived. A knight saw himself crowned king. A servant watched her own funeral. One guest, pale and trembling, swore he saw his reflection staring back at him, smiling. No one knew what the mirror truly showed. Some believed it revealed fate. Others thought it exposed hidden truths. A few whispered that it was a window, Not to the past or future, but to lives unlived. One night, a noblewoman reached out and touched the glass. She gasped. Her body remained where it stood, but her eyes went blank, as if her soul had slipped through the surface. She never spoke again. Never blinked. Just stared into the mirror, watching whatever vision had claimed her. From then on, the guests avoided it. Even the bard gave it a wide berth. Because the mirror did not lie. And sometimes, the truth is more dangerous than any curse. Part 8. The door that led nowhere. At the far end of the banquet hall, half hidden behind velvet curtains, stood a door few ever noticed. It was small, carved with strange symbols that shifted under moonlight, and never bore a lock. Yet no one had opened it in centuries. Some believed it led to the kitchens. Others thought it was sealed shut. A few whispered that it was not a door at all, but a threshold. Once, long ago, a curious page tried to open it. He turned the handle slowly, expecting warmth, or wind, or the scent of bread baking in an unseen oven. But when the door creaked open, there was nothing. Only darkness. A darkness so deep it swallowed sound, color, and thought itself. He stepped forward. And vanished. His name was never spoken again. Since then, the door remained closed. But sometimes, during the longest nights, guests claimed to see it move, just slightly, as if someone, or something, was trying to come in. Or perhaps, trying to get out. Part 9. The Final Toast. As centuries passed and the feast grew heavier with time, something began to shift. It was not a sound. It was not a movement. It was a feeling, an unease that settled over the banquet hall like dust on untouched wine. The laughter had begun to change. Not louder, not softer, but different. As if it came from somewhere else now. As if the guests were no longer the ones laughing, but something else entirely, something watching from behind their frozen smiles. Duke Reginald still sat at the head of the table, his goblet forever raised. Lady Isolde's eyes had gone glassy, her lips parted in an unspoken word. The musicians played without blinking, their hands moving as if pulled by invisible strings. And the bard? He stood. For the first time in 300 years, he rose from his seat. The music stopped. The candles flickered. A single drop of wine spilled from Reginald's goblet and never touched the floor. The bard raised his own cup, his voice soft yet carrying through the vast hall like wind through stone corridors. To those who stayed, he said. To those who forgot. And to those who will remember. No one moved. But they listened. Because for the first time in centuries, someone had spoken. Part 10. The Awakening of Time. Then came the sound. A slow, distant tick. Like a heartbeat waking after centuries of silence. The clock in the tower stirred. The mirror shimmered. The door creaked open just slightly. And outside, deep in the forest where the castle had been lost to time, a bird sang. Just once. But it was enough. The spell cracked, not all at once, but in pieces, like old parchment curling in fire. Guests blinked for the first time in centuries. Wine finally spilled. A dancer stumbled mid-turn. One by one, the trapped souls of the feast exhaled, their breath fogging the air like ghosts remembering how to be alive. The bard smiled. His form wavered like candlelight. "I gave you what you asked for," he whispered, vanishing into mist. "Now go home." And with that, the great doors of Valtoria Castle swung open. The world beyond had changed. But the feast was finally over. The traveler who left the feast. The stranger at the gate. In the year 1693, a traveler named Elias van walked out of the forest near Eldemere with nothing but mud-stained boots and eyes that had forgotten how to blink. He did not remember how he got there. He did not know where he had been. All he knew was this: he had left something behind. Or someone had left him. Villagers found him wandering the road at dawn, muttering words they didn't recognize. His coat was fine, though centuries out of fashion. His boots were dry, even though it had rained all night. When asked who he was, he only whispered, "I came from the feast." No one believed him. But when they touched his hand, their breath caught for a moment, as if they had tasted time itself. And so began the tale of the man who escaped the eternal banquet, or perhaps never truly left it at all. Echoes in his wake. Elias stayed in Eldemere for a while, renting a small room above the baker's shop. He spoke little, ate less, and often sat by the window, staring into the distance as if expecting someone to return. At first, the townsfolk thought he was simply tired, perhaps lost, perhaps mad. But soon, strange things began happening around him. Candles burned without flame. Clocks stopped at midnight. Mirrors fogged when no breath touched them. Children claimed to see reflections of people who weren't there. Servants swore they heard laughter coming from empty rooms. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind blew just right, someone would swear they smelled roasted venison and spiced wine on the air. Elias never noticed. He only listened, as if waiting for something to call him back. The dream that wasn't his. Elias could not sleep. Not because he feared nightmares, but because his dreams were not his own. Each night, he saw the same thing, a grand hall lit by flickering candlelight, filled with guests frozen in laughter. A bard plucking soft notes on a lute made of moonlight. A mirror that showed faces he had never met, yet somehow recognized. And always, a voice called his name, not from the dream, but from outside it. "Come back," it whispered. "You left your glass unfinished." When he woke, the sheets were damp with sweat. His hands trembled. And sometimes, just sometimes, there was wine on his lips. Old wine. Sweet. Spiced. Too old to be real. Too familiar to be imagined. The invitation arrives. One morning, Elias found an envelope on his doorstep. It bore no seal, no address. Just his name, written in elegant script that shimmered slightly in the light. Inside was a single card. "We miss you." There was no signature, no date. Only a faint scent of rosemary and burnt sugar. That night, he dreamed again. This time, the guests turned toward him as one. Their smiles widened. Their goblets lifted in silent toast. And the bard looked up. He smiled. Then, he stood. And the music began again. The glass that never empty. Elias tried to forget. He burned the letter. He avoided mirrors. He moved to a new town under a different name. He told himself it was over. But then came the glass. One evening, after a long day of walking through fields and forests, he entered a quiet tavern and ordered a drink. The innkeeper poured him a cup of red wine and set it before him. Elias took a sip and froze. It was the same wine from the same feast. Still warm, still sweet. He looked down. The cup was full, even though he had just drunk from it. He tried again. Again, it remained untouched, as if the past had followed him home and refused to let go. The mirror that remembered. Elias began avoiding mirrors. At first, it was only one, a small, tarnished thing in his rented room above the apothecary. He caught a glimpse of himself and thought he saw someone else behind him, smiling gently with eyes that had not blinked in centuries. He smashed the mirror. But the reflection remained. In every glass he passed after that, shop windows, polished silver, even the surface of still water, he saw more than just himself. He saw others standing beside him. Nobles dressed in forgotten fashions. A knight with hollow eyes. A woman in red silk who looked like she was waiting for something. One night, he stood before a Rain Street window and whispered, "Are you still there?" The reflection smiled back. And this time, it answered, "Yes." The letter without sender. It came on a Monday morning, slipped beneath his door like a secret too long kept. No envelope. No seal. Just a single sheet of parchment, yellowed with age, carrying only 4 words. "You never left us." There was no signature. No return address. Only the faint scent of rosemary and burnt sugar, the same fragrance that sometimes drifted through his dreams. That night, Elias dreamed again of the feast. But this time, the guests were watching the door. Waiting. The bard sat at the far end of the table, plucking a soft tune on his lute. When he noticed Elias, he lifted his cup in silent toast. Then he stood. And the music began again. Elias woke with a start. His hands were cold. And his lips tasted of wine. Old wine. Too old to be real. The clock that ticked for him. One evening, while wandering the outskirts of Eldermere, Elias stumbled upon an abandoned chapel hidden deep within the woods. Its doors creaked open without touch. Dust hung thick in the air. And at the heart of the chapel stood a clock, tall, black, and carved from stone that shimmered faintly in the dim light. He stepped closer. The clock did not show numbers. Only names. Hundreds of them. And among them, his. Elias Varn. Still fresh. Still warm. As if it had just been added. He reached out, fingers trembling, and pressed his palm against the cold metal. A single tick echoed through the chapel. Then silence. But now, every night, just before sleep takes him, Elias hears it again. One heartbeat. One breath. One name. His. The door that called his name. It started as a whisper in the wind. Just outside his window, late at night, when the world should have been asleep. At first, Elias thought it was the trees. Or the wind through the eaves. But soon, the sound became clearer. It was a voice. Soft. Familiar. Calling his name. He followed it. Through narrow alleys and forgotten paths, past shuttered shops and sleeping homes. It led him beyond the town's edge, into the forest where the trees grew tall and the sky vanished behind tangled branches. And there, hidden between two ancient oaks, he found it. A door. Plain. Wooden. Weathered by time. No house surrounded it. No walls. No roof. Just a door. He reached out. The moment his hand touched the handle, the voice stopped. Silence returned. And then, from the other side, laughter. Endless. Echoing. Waiting. And Elias understood. The feast hadn't ended. It had only paused. For him. The final step. Elias stood before the door for what felt like hours. The forest around him was silent. Even the wind held its breath. He knew what lay beyond. Not death. Not madness. But memory. The bird's song. The mirror's reflection. The clock's ticking soul. All of it waited for him. He turned once, looking back toward the town he had tried to call home. Lights flickered behind curtains. Dogs barked in distant yards. Life moved forward, unaware of the pause in time just beyond the trees. Elias smiled. Then, slowly, he opened the door and stepped inside. Behind him, the forest swallowed the space where the door had been. Now, only empty space remains. But some say, on the coldest nights, if you walk far enough into the woods, you can hear laughter on the wind. And if you listen closely, someone calling your name. Good night.